So you know how everyone says the Roman Empire fell in 476 when Romulus Augustulus got deposed by a guy named Odoacer? Well, that's only half true. It's because while Western Rome was indeed obliterated in just about a century, the Eastern Roman Empire, or as we now call it, the Byzantine Empire, carried on for another 1,000 years until 1453, when it was conquered by the rising Turkish Ottoman Empire. That is, unless, of course, it hadn't been. But then again, most people imagine that Rome was long gone by the Dark Ages, just a relic of classical antiquity, a footnote in the history of Western civilization. Except the Byzantines preserved Roman law, its architecture, its engineering, even its language. They kept alive the flame of classical Roman culture through the Middle Ages, centuries after the West had collapsed into Germanic kingdoms and warring Italian principalities. And so what if it hadn't ended at all? What if Constantinople had never fallen to the Ottomans? Well, it turns out the fall of Constantinople reshaped global power, reshaped trade, reshaped religion, reshaped empire. And if the Byzantines had survived, well, the course of history might have been radically different, not just for Europe, but for Islam and for global Christianity too. Now, before we dive into all the crazy alternate histories that might have happened if the Byzantines had never fallen, we should probably establish just how unique their situation was. C. The story of the Byzantine Empire starts in the mid-8th century AD, after a series of civil wars split the once unified Roman Empire into East and West. And despite what the name suggests, the eastern half was actually much more prosperous, much more urban, much more densely populated, much more wealthy, and with a much stronger claim to being the true Roman Empire. In fact, because they controlled the richest provinces and the vast majority of the Roman military, Eastern Roman emperors frequently subjugated revolts in the Western provinces and kept the Western Roman Empire around mostly as a buffer against external threats. But as the Western Roman Empire continued to decline, this arrangement became less about control and more about self-preservation. For starters, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine emperors had a much more stable and secure domain. Sure, they were still fighting the Sasanian Persians, the Arab armies of the Rashidun Caliphate, and later the Abbasid Caliphate, and the various Turkic and Slavic tribes along their northern borders. But none of these foes ever managed to make significant inroads into the heartland of the Byzantine Empire. In contrast, the Western Roman emperors were fighting the Alemanni, the Goths, the Vandals, the Franks, and their own rebellious generals in a nearly endless cycle of invasion and betrayal that saw barbarian armies repeatedly penetrate deep into Italy. As such, the Byzantines focused much more on keeping their borders secure, building a series of fortresses and defensive walls across their extensive frontiers. Most notably, the mighty Theodosian walls surrounding Constantinople, which would hold off siege after siege and shape the city for centuries to come. And while the western half of the empire spiraled into ruin, the eastern half prospered, preserving the best of Roman architecture, art, literature, and philosophy, but also developing a distinctly new Byzantine culture. In fact, by the 9th century, Emperor Leo the Isaurian even tried to reform the empire by replacing classical Roman education with a program that emphasized rhetoric, poetry, and religious doctrine. Meanwhile, unlike their decadent Western Roman counterparts, the Byzantines understood the importance of legal continuity. And under the Emperor Justinian I, they codified and streamlined Roman law, producing the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Justinian Code, which became the foundation of European law and is still used today in many countries. And the Byzantines were also the heirs of ancient Greece, preserving and building on the work of Euclid, Ptolemy, Hippocrates, Galen, and all the other titans of classical Greek thought. In fact, to the Byzantines, their empire wasn't just the continuation of Rome, but the continuation of Greek and Roman civilization as a whole. The empire was eternal, and its capital city, Constantinople, was the center of the world. Unfortunately, that hubris was justified in the eyes of God, nature, and man. But it didn't last forever. Beginning in the 11th century, things began to unravel. The empire was badly damaged by the First Crusade, and in 1204, Constantinople was sacked by Venetian and French crusaders who looted the city for weeks. Although the Byzantines recaptured Constantinople soon after, the empire was now vastly weakened. To make matters worse, outside threats continued. To the north, Slavic and Rus forces increasingly threatened the imperial borders. To the east, the Christian kingdom of Georgia was asserting its independence. And to the south, the rising power of the Ottomans was rapidly gobbling up Byzantine territory in Anatolia. By the mid-14th century, the Ottomans were knocking on the gates of Constantinople itself. And after Sultan Murad I seized Adrianople in 1361, it was clear that the end was nigh. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II laid siege to the city. And although the defenders fought valiantly, Constantinople fell just 2 months later. The Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque, the imperial palace into an arsenal, and Istanbul became the capital of the Ottoman Empire. And now it's time to ask ourselves, what would happen if Constantinople had never fallen? Well, for starters, no Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans rose to prominence largely by conquering Byzantine lands in Anatolia and then using that newfound wealth and manpower to conquer the rest of the Byzantine Empire. No fall of Constantinople means no rise of Ottoman power. So the entire trajectory of the Middle East is thrown into question. For starters, Islam may have stayed focused on the Arab world and Persia rather than expanding into the Balkans and southeastern Europe. And without the Ottomans acting as a barrier between Russia and the rest of the Islamic world, perhaps Pan-Slavic and Pan-Islamic solidarity would have developed sooner, perhaps leading to an earlier clash between a united Slavic East and a united Islamic Middle East. Then Greece and the rest of the Balkans may have looked very different too. The Ottoman occupation lasted for centuries, suppressing local cultures and forcibly converting or expelling Christians. Had the Ottomans never risen, it's possible that Orthodox Christianity would have survived in the Peloponnese and islands like Crete, Rhodes, and Cyprus, and the same goes for the Balkans, which might have remained Orthodox Christian rather than becoming overwhelmingly Catholic or Muslim. Furthermore, without the shadow of the Ottoman threat hanging over them, the Balkan states might have developed stronger ties to Eastern Rome and possibly achieved earlier modern statehood. Meanwhile, the Renaissance was in part sparked by the flight of Byzantine scholars from Constantinople after its fall, bringing with them irreplaceable texts from antiquity. Had the Byzantines survived, those scholars and texts might have stayed in the East, possibly delaying or even redirecting the Renaissance toward Italy. Then there's the issue of the Great Schism. The Orthodox Church in Constantinople was officially separated from the Catholic Church in Rome back in 1054, but relations between the two were far from hostile. In fact, the two churches continued to cooperate closely on a number of issues. And a powerful Byzantine church might have helped bridge the divide between Orthodox and Catholic Christianity, or maybe deep into the schism. Finally, that leaves the fate of the Vatican itself. You see, the Bishop of Rome claimed supremacy over all of Christendom. But that claim only became widely accepted after the fall of Constantinople, when the Pope was effectively the most senior surviving member of the Christian clergy. Without that event, perhaps the Bishop of Rome stays in the background, maintaining the close relationship he had with the Eastern Roman emperors, ruling over the Church in all but name. In the end, the Eastern Roman Empire was both more resilient and more vulnerable than its Western counterpart. They inherited the best parts of the Roman past and created their own unique culture, all while fending off wave after wave of invaders and weathering internal strife. But they were undone in the end by their enemies within, and eventually the Ottomans from without. But what if they hadn't been? If the Byzantine Empire had survived, there may have been no Ottomans, no Renaissance as we know it. In a radically different Christian and European world, the Eastern Roman legacy could have shaped modernity itself. Sometimes one city falling, just one, can change the course of world history. But what if it hadn't? Hey there, Speedy! Thanks for watching. If you're fascinated by alternate histories and ancient empires, hit subscribe. And let us know in the comments what empire you wish had never fallen.